The judge overseeing Donald Trump's New York City criminal trial agreed Friday to delay his sentencing until after Election Day. The former president was supposed to be sentenced on September 18th after being found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records back in May. Trump requested a delay, and the judge agreed, pushing sentencing back to November. That decision has raised questions about how the upcoming election may affect the myriad of legal trouble that Trump is facing and how a Trump win could impact it all, especially after a post the former president shared Saturday night on Truth Social. In it, he threatened to jail adversaries who he believes falsified election results in 2020. Writing, "When I win, those people that created, or rather that cheated, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences." CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe is joining us now to break it down. Okay, Rebecca, first off, I want to break this into before the election, after the election, but before the inauguration and after the inauguration. I know this is uncharted territory. But are judges, first off, obligated in any way, illegally or otherwise, to do what we saw the judge in New York do, which is postpone the sentencing until after the election, presumably so as not to have an impact on the outcome of the election? Do judges have to do things like that?
First of all, good morning, Anne-Marie. Thanks for having me on. No, judges have broad discretion here. I think Judge Merchan really thought long and hard and was in kind of a tough spot because no matter what he did, some segment of the population is going to think in some way this is affecting the election. But he chose, I think, with the idea of preserving the court's legitimacy to push this off beyond the election so it did not look as if the court case and the prosecution was really about politics, but rather about the law.
So then, once the election happens, theoretically, if Trump is elected, what would then happen to those criminal cases? I mean, this sentencing is supposed to happen after the election, but before the inauguration. So he wouldn't be president. I mean, what happens to these cases?
Right. So if Trump wins the presidency, that is essentially a nail in the coffin, the final nail in the coffin of the federal criminal cases against him. And that's because what he can do at that point is hire an attorney general who will fire the special counsel and dismiss those cases. Or, of course, there's always the option of him pardoning himself, which is an untested legal precept. But, Trump has never shied away from pushing the limits of his power. So he could certainly try to do that. Either way, it's the end of the federal cases. The state cases against him, of course, he has no power over those cases, but it will likely delay the impact of those cases because the two cases, the one in Georgia and the sentence pending in New York, my guess is that those judges will use their discretion not to proceed because it would be too difficult to prosecute or impose a sentence on a sitting president. So essentially, he's either going to end these cases against him if he wins the presidency or push off the impact until after his presidency is over.
Okay, so since we're talking in sort of the world of theory, things that we never contemplated happening, if we have an election which is contested, we know that the former president is contesting the last election. And so if we have an election and it's contested and there are court cases in various states about the outcome of the election, and we have a November 26th sentencing date for Donald Trump. I mean, what happens to that case then? I presume that they could maybe argue that they need sort of more time, but how complicated could things get?
I think, things get pretty complicated. But again, judges have broad discretion for precisely this reason, because there are these external complications that can kind of weigh on a case. And the judge is focused on the law and the facts, but cannot ignore what's happening in the outside world. And one other thing I just wanted to comment, because you put on that Truth Social post of the former presidents, and this really is one of those things that concerns those of us who care about democratic institutions, because historically the Department of Justice has been independent of the presidency to ensure that prosecutions are fair and impartial. And this statement, there are limits to what he can do. Again, he may push those limits, but there are courts that will intervene. He needs prosecutors to be on his side. But this is an extremely troubling message that he's sending out about how he expects and wants to use his power.
I think that's a really good point and just a great reminder. The person in the executive office is not supposed to have influence over the courts. There's a division for a reason, checks and balances. So thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.